People who are genuinely confident rarely tell you they're not. That sentence probably landed as obvious. It isn't. Because the behavior it is describing, the ritual self-deprecation, the deflected compliment, the preemptive qualification before someone else can criticize, isn't performed by people who lack confidence. It is performed, most reliably, by people who have calculated that appearing to lack confidence is more advantageous than displaying the confidence they actually possess. That is the thing the observation misses. We've been treating false humility as an insecurity symptom. The research suggests it functions more like a weapon. The question underneath this entire script is one most people cannot answer honestly about themselves. When you minimize your own competence, who are you protecting? And from what? Marcus is 38 years old. He lives in Denver. He is, by any measurable standard, exceptionally good at his job. A senior architect at a firm that has won 3 regional awards in the past 4 years. 2 of them for projects Marcus led. He knows this. He has always known this. And yet, in every meeting where his work is discussed, Marcus arrives with a preloaded set of self-diminishments. He calls his own designs rough drafts when they're finished products. He credits the team for decisions that were entirely his. When a client says the building is beautiful, Marcus says he got lucky with the site conditions. His colleagues find this charming. His subordinates find it humanizing. His supervisor privately finds it exhausting. What Marcus is doing is not humility. It is precision positioning. He has learned, not consciously, but through years of behavioral feedback, that the person who appears to want the least credit is rarely challenged for taking the most space. This is the first thing to understand about false humility. It doesn't feel like a strategy to the person performing it. It feels like caution. It feels like appropriate self-awareness. It feels, sometimes, like generosity. The feeling is real. The function is something else entirely. There is a moment that happens in group conversations. You'll recognize this, where someone says something genuinely impressive, and then immediately undercuts it. I don't really know, it is just a thought. And you watch the room, and the room doesn't believe the disclaimer, but it rewards it anyway. The person who just performed that gesture of inadequacy walks out with more social capital than they walked in with, not less. That gap between the performed inadequacy and the received authority is not accidental. It is a learned behavioral loop. And like all behavioral loops, it runs on reinforcement. The social psychology term for what Marcus is doing is self-handicapping. Through attribution manipulation, he is engineering how credit and blame are assigned in advance of outcomes. But the more precise behavioral name for what you've just watched in that meeting room is dominance display through apparent retreat. Real retreat looks like absence. What Marcus performs looks like presence with apology. The apology is the tell. 3 centuries before Marcus was born, a man sat in a hut on the island of Genryujima, alone, hours before a duel that would determine whether he lived or died. He had defeated over 60 opponents. He had spent decades developing a philosophy of combat, so refined that even his silence in battle was considered tactical. He was, by the assessment of everyone who had faced him, the most dangerous swordsman alive. He arrived to the duel 2 hours late, disheveled, apparently unprepared. His opponent, also a master, also famous, also surrounded by devoted students, had been waiting in full ceremonial readiness since dawn. The late arrival was not arrogance. It was information delivery. The man who arrived late was telling his opponent something precise. Your preparation cannot touch me. He was communicating a level of confidence so complete that ritual readiness was unnecessary. He was performing, in behavioral terms, an inverse dominance display, the highest possible signal of capability through the appearance of its absence. His name was Miyamoto Musashi, and the duel ended in moments. Musashi's own written account of this philosophy is exact. Do nothing which is of no use. The late arrival was not carelessness. It was the most precisely useful thing he could have done. Different world, different century, same internal structure operating. Marcus's self-deprecation and Musashi's late arrival are not the same behavior, but they are the same law. Law 1, the retreat signal. When someone with genuine competence consistently minimizes their contribution before an outcome is assessed, they are not reducing their social exposure, they are expanding it. The disclaimer creates expectation asymmetry. If things go poorly, they were right to be cautious. If things go well, the understatement amplifies the achievement. Marcus calls his finished designs rough drafts. Every time he does this, he is not protecting himself from criticism. He is building a frame in which any criticism that arrives will appear to exceed the offense. The roughness was already acknowledged. The beauty was not. When the beauty appears, it exceeds its container. Marcus has designed that outcome. He just doesn't know he designed it. Musashi's dishevelment before Ganryujima did the same work. His opponent was prepared for a confrontation between equals. Musashi refused to occupy that frame. He arrived outside it. The duel was decided before a blade was drawn. Centuries earlier, different world, same structure operating, high-functioning performers do not use false humility to avoid scrutiny. They use it to control the frame in which scrutiny arrives. The retreat signal does not reduce their visibility. It determines the angle from which they are seen. When someone who has integrated this law speaks about their own work, there is a quality of deliberate understatement that is precise rather than anxious. The person who is genuinely anxious overqualifies without control. The person who has integrated this law underqualifies with surgical accuracy, enough to soften the frame, never enough to actually diminish the perception. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. Because the behavioral law just described, the one Marcus is running, the one Musashi ran, is not exclusively performed by high-functioning people at the top of hierarchies. It is performed by people at every level who have discovered, usually without ever naming it, that appearing to want less is the most efficient way to receive more without triggering the social antibodies that direct displays of ambition activate. You've felt those antibodies. The subtle cooling in the room when someone claims credit too cleanly. The faint collective judgment when someone accepts a compliment without deflecting. The unspoken social agreement that confidence, when visible, requires apology. That agreement is real, and it explains why the behavior persists. Not because people are strategists, because they are responders. They found a behavior that worked and they kept using it. Law 2, the calibration tax. False humility carries a cost that the performer never pays directly. The cost is distributed onto the people around them. The colleagues who absorb the displaced credit, the subordinates who mirror the pattern and underperform as a result. The team culture that gradually learns that competence must arrive disguised to be socially acceptable. Marcus's subordinates have watched him for 3 years. They have learned, from watching, that owning work directly creates social friction. 2 of his most talented junior architects now pre-apologize for their own presentations. They learned this from Marcus. Marcus does not know he taught it. Musashi's Ganryujima strategy was singular. It worked because it was deployed once, by one man in one context. His writings make this explicit. The strategy was calibrated to the opponent, the moment, the terrain. He did not use the same approach twice. The behavioral law he understood was precision, not repetition. What Marcus is running is repetition without precision. The tax of that difference compounds. The performers who move through organizations with the least friction are not those who hide their competence most thoroughly. They are those who have learned to present competence in packaging that doesn't activate the room's status. Threat response. That is a different skill. It requires knowing what you are actually communicating, not just what you intend to. Someone who has integrated this law does not systematically understate. They read the room with enough precision to know when understatement serves accuracy and when it serves concealment. The difference is visible in their consistency. They say the same thing about their work whether or not the room will reward the honesty. Law 3, the recognition debt. Every time a person deflects recognition they have earned, they create a social debt that they expect, at some level, to be repaid. Not consciously. But the behavior continues because at some point in the past, the deflection was followed by pursuit. Someone insisted the credit was deserved, and the moment of insistence delivered more validation than direct acceptance would have. That loop. Marcus says the design was lucky. His clients push back. They insist it is brilliant. He receives the insistence. That transaction, the offering, the deflection, the pursuit, the reception, is more emotionally satisfying to Marcus than a simple exchange would have been. The humility is not self-effacement. It is an invitation to be seen more clearly than he would allow himself to be seen directly. Musashi wrote in the Book of Five Rings that the true practitioner does not need others to confirm his path. The discipline, correctly understood, confirms itself through application. He was describing the behavioral endpoint of the law, the place where the recognition debt no longer exists because the need it was built on has been resolved. That resolution is not a feeling. It is behavioral. It looks like the absence of the deflection ritual entirely. The most internally secure performers do not perform humility, and they do not perform confidence. They perform accuracy. They say what their work is. They receive responses to it without engineering the responses in advance. When you meet someone who has reached this, and they are rare, you notice that their self-assessment and others' assessment of them are unusually close together. There is no gap where the performance used to live. Marcus, near the end of a quarterly review, received feedback that one of his projects had been selected as the firm's submission for a national award. His first response, the one that came out before he could construct it, was, "Really? This one, not the performance, the real response." In that moment, before the calibrated self-deprecation reassembled itself, something was visible, not insecurity, exactly. Something more precise than that. The look of a person who has spent so long managing how they are perceived, that they no longer trust what they actually perceive. That is the cost the behavioral laws don't show on the surface. Not the external cost, the internal one. The person performing false humility is not deceiving their audience. They are, with greater consequence, deceiving themselves about what they need, about what they've earned, and about what it would actually cost them to be seen accurately. False humility is not the behavior of someone who thinks too little of themselves. It is the behavior of someone who has decided that the truth about themselves is too socially dangerous to deliver without packaging. His first response, the one that came out before he could construct it, was, "Really? This one, not the performance, the real response." In that moment, before the calibrated self-deprecation reassembled itself, something was visible, not insecurity, exactly. Something more precise than that. The look of a person who has spent so long managing how they are perceived, that they no longer trust what they actually perceive. That is the cost the behavioral laws don't show on the surface. Not the external cost, the internal one. The person performing false humility is not deceiving their audience. They are, with greater consequence, deceiving themselves about what they need, about what they've earned, and about what it would actually cost them to be seen accurately. False humility is not the behavior of someone who thinks too little of themselves. It is the behavior of someone who has decided that the truth about themselves is too socially dangerous to deliver without packaging. His first response, the one that came out before he could construct it, was, "Really? This one, not the performance, the real response." In that moment, before the calibrated self-deprecation reassembled itself, something was visible, not insecurity, exactly. Something more precise than that. The look of a person who has spent so long managing how they are perceived, that they no longer trust what they actually perceive. That is the cost the behavioral laws don't show on the surface. Not the external cost, the internal one. The person performing false humility is not deceiving their audience. They are, with greater consequence, deceiving themselves about what they need, about what they've earned, and about what it would actually cost them to be seen accurately. False humility is not the behavior of someone who thinks too little of themselves. It is the behavior of someone who has decided that the truth about themselves is too socially dangerous to deliver without packaging. And the question that the rest of this script is going to answer, the one you cannot answer quickly, is not whether you do this. It is what you believe would happen if you stopped. That answer is where the real pattern lives. Most people have never looked directly at it. The pattern underneath this one explains why. What specifically do you understate? And who exactly are you protecting when you do it? The question isn't whether the behavior is calculated. By now, you know it isn't, not consciously, not most of the time. The more disorienting question is what the behavior is protecting, and what it has cost to maintain that protection over years. And the question that the rest of this script is going to answer, the one you cannot answer quickly, is not whether you do this. It is what you believe would happen if you stopped. That answer is where the real pattern lives. Most people have never looked directly at it. The pattern underneath this one explains why. What specifically do you understate? And who exactly are you protecting when you do it? The question isn't whether the behavior is calculated. By now, you know it isn't, not consciously, not most of the time. The more disorienting question is what the behavior is protecting, and what it has cost to maintain that protection over years. Marcus knows he does it. He has known for a while. Knowing has not changed the behavior. That is the thing left sitting without resolution, because naming a pattern and being free of a pattern are separated by something more structural than awareness. The pattern is self-sustaining. Self-sustaining behavioral patterns share a specific architecture. They don't persist because people are weak or unaware. They persist because the behavior is doing something necessary, something the person has not yet developed an alternative way to do. The moment the necessity is met through other means, the behavior loses its function. Without function, it fades. But identifying the necessity is harder than it sounds. Because the necessity that false humility is meeting is not what most people assume it to be. There is a difference between a behavior you have and an identity you operate from. Behaviors can be examined from the outside. Identities feel like the inside itself. Marcus does not have a habit of self-deprecation. Marcus has a self-concept in which his value is contingent on performance, on reception, on the gap remaining intact between what he delivers and what he claims to deliver. The moment that gap closes, in his internal architecture, his value becomes fixed, and fixed value can be fully assessed. The behavior is not protecting his reputation. It is protecting his self-concept from the risk of full evaluation. This is the identity insurance mechanism. It operates beneath conscious awareness and runs on one core belief: if I never fully claim the work cannot fully reveal my limits. People operating from identity insurance rarely describe themselves directly. They describe themselves in relation to outcomes. It went well, not I did well. We figured it out, not I solved it. The identity remains positioned just behind the work, never fully coincident with it, visible enough to receive credit, distant enough to survive failure. Marcus has led 3 award-winning projects. He has described all 3 the same way. The team came together on this one. The site did most of the work. The client trusted us, and it paid off. In 36 months of producing exceptional work, Marcus has never said, I made this, and it is good. Not once. The people who appear most immune to criticism are not the ones who have prepared the best defenses. They are the ones who have separated their self-concept from their output entirely. Not by detachment, but by grounding. They know what they are capable of with enough precision that a single outcome, positive or negative, cannot revise the estimate. They do not need the gap. They have replaced the gap with measurement. The person who has integrated this law assesses their work the way a skilled analyst assesses data, with interest in accuracy rather than investment in the result. They can say a project failed without the failure, meaning they failed. They can say work is excellent without the excellence, feeling like a claim that could be revoked. Between those two positions, identity contingency and identity stability, is a distance that most people underestimate. Not because the path is long. Because the first step requires doing the one thing the entire behavioral system was built to prevent. Every person operating from false humility has an exposure threshold, a precise level of visibility beyond which the social environment, as they have modeled it, becomes unsafe. The threshold is not arbitrary. It was calibrated by specific past experiences. It was set at the level of visibility at which, once something went wrong. This is the law that makes the pattern self-sustaining. The behavior doesn't just protect against current risk. It preserves the threat model that was built when the original risk occurred. The person is not responding to their current environment. They are responding to an older one, with a pattern that was adaptive then, and is costly now. Watch what happens when someone practicing false humility receives more credit than they anticipated. The discomfort is visible, and it is specific. It is not embarrassment. It is something closer to alarm. The exposure threshold has been breached. The behavior that usually prevents it failed to work. The person will recalibrate immediately, deflect harder, qualify more, attribute more broadly. The system is correcting. At the national award announcement, Marcus's first response was, "Really? This one?" That was not surprise. That was alarm. The threshold had been crossed without his management. For a moment, his work was fully visible, fully named, fully his. The system responded before he could. Musashi spent years in isolation after Genryujima. He stopped fighting duels. He turned to painting, calligraphy, and writing. Most biographers treat this as spiritual development. The behavioral reading is more precise. Musashi had spent his entire career calibrating his threat model to opponents. After Genryujima, there were no opponents that threat model could usefully prepare for. He had to build a different internal architecture. One not organized around the management of visibility. The Dokudo, his final written work, composed days before his death, contains this: "Do not fear death, not as bravery, as the endpoint of a systematic dismantling of exposure thresholds across every domain of his life." Centuries earlier. Different world, same structure requiring the same resolution. The exposure threshold cannot be raised through courage. It can only be revised through evidence. The specific evidence that revises it is the repeated experience of full visibility without the predicted consequence. That experience cannot be manufactured through encouragement. It has to be lived, and it has to be survived. And it has to be registered by the part of the system that set the threshold in the first place. Someone who has systematically revised their exposure threshold through evidence does not appear brave. They appear, more accurately, calibrated. They know what their work costs to produce, what it is worth, and what consequences its full visibility has actually generated. Their modesty, when it appears, is descriptive rather than protective. The difference is audible if you know what to listen for. If you've ever caught yourself deflecting a compliment you actually earned, hit subscribe, because we don't just talk about the patterns, we show you how to break